Rob is asking, it is my understanding that Shia Islam is less restrictive than Sunni Islam when it comes to music, dancing, and art. For example, Shia Islam permits drawing pictures of people or animals, while Sunni Islam that's just generally considered haram. Do you know why this is? Was Ali more permissive of these things than Abu Bakr was? No. That is not the reason. All right, first of all, you have to understand that it used to be the other way around. It used to be that Sunni Islam was more open to, more flexible than Shia Islam, okay? So, first of all, forget Abu Bakr and Ali, okay? So when it comes to Abu Bakr and Ali, that is the foundations of how Shia Islam started. It was like it was a family dispute. This is how I usually summarize the evolution of the Shia-Sunni divide. This is my summary of it. A family dispute turned into a political dispute, turned into a theological dispute. Okay? So when you're talking about Ali and Abu Bakr, this is the family/political dispute phase. This is not the theological. This is not the part, the Shia-Sunni divide was defined way after Abu Bakr and Ali were gone. At that point, there were no at the time of Ali and Abu Bakr, there were no Shias and Sunnis. There were like people who agreed with Ali and people who agreed with Abu Bakr or whatever, right? So, and Ali, I think, was one. Okay, I don't know about this. This is my Shia bias showing. I think Ali, we were told like Abu Bakr and Osman and Ali, they were less Islamic than Ali. Okay, but this is, I don't know if this is. I don't think this is true. This is just like Shia propaganda that I've been brainwashed with. Okay, so yeah. Well, okay, so where was I? All right, so originally, the way at the foundations, after the whole 4 caliphs were over and stuff, like initial Islamic world, if you have to think about it, right? The people that the prototype of the proto-Shias and proto-Sunnis, the way they looked at the world is that the Sunnis were more flexible because there be no Muhammad. So how do we realize what is Islamic and what is not Islamic? And like you know what we do? We think about it. Yeah, we think about it. We do ijtihad. There was promise that the Muslim community, the Ummah, if they come to an agreement, Muhammad promised that they will come to a proper agreement, right? So we just do ijtihad and we just like decide what's the right thing to do. Okay, there's no Muhammad to tell us, so we just use the Quran and the Sunnah. And if it's not covered by the Quran and Sunnah, we just do ijtihad and we just use the Quran and Sunnah to figure out what this new case that hasn't the Quran and Sunnah has any reference to, based on the precedent that the Quran and Sunnah set, what conclusions that we have to come up with here. Okay, so we have to think. Okay, we have to use our brains. Okay, that introduces flexibility. Okay, the Shias and the proto-Shias, on the other hand, they were like, how dare you? How dare you? Think about you're relying on your brain. You're relying on human flawed logic. That's not acceptable, right? The proto-Shias, they're like, God would not leave Muslims alone. There has to be a guide, a perfect guide, not just a guide. The Sunnis, they believe Muhammad was perfect. They didn't believe Omar, Abu Bakr, Ali, or anyone else was perfect. They're just like, we're just gonna do the best we can. Okay, but the Shias required perfection because they would say a just God would not leave his people without a perfect guide for us to follow. Follow perfectly, not like think about it and come up with our own conclusions. Okay? So you have, after Muhammad, you have Ali, and then Hassan, Hussein, and the 12 Imams. And the 12th Imam, during his hiding, he has ways to send you guides or whatever. That's another topic for another day. But you have your Imams, and they represent the perfect way to do Islam. Okay? Are we? If you do, you want to know if you're Islamic properly, well, look at the Imam at your time, or just ask him. Okay? But you follow perfectly, and you don't use your own logic or reasoning. So based on that standard, Sunnis used to be a lot less restrictive than Shias. Okay? So how did that change? The way it changed is that the Sunnis decided to close the doors of ijtihad at some point. I don't know when that happened. I think I don't remember. I read this. I think maybe it was around the year 1000. I'm not sure. Okay, but they decided like, okay, we did enough ijtihad. So we did so much ijtihad that we probably covered everything, and we need to. And people be crazying with this, with their people are like coming up with all sorts of crazy nonsense, and this is too much innovation. Okay, I think we should like just canonize everything that we have come up with, and be like, okay, we have answered everything that could be questioned. Okay, anything that like that people could be wondering about the right way of doing, we have covered it so well that we should not let innovation or bid'ah anymore. And from now on, we will close the door of ijtihad, and we have an acceptable model for everybody to follow. And then you have the four schools of Islamic, four schools of thought in Sunni Islam. And I just pick, and I'm like, which one is the correct one? You know, because there was too much, like, people were like starting to, they were worried, rightfully so, about like too much divergence and sex after sex after sex. So like, we have four schools of thought. Pick which. We're not going to compete with each other. Okay, we're not going to say that this one is right, that one is wrong. All four of them are correct, even though they have sometimes contradictory suggestions. If you pick one of them, you're going to be fine. Okay, like as long as you abide by the school of thought that each one of them. So it's not like these four are fighting with each other. Like, you're expected as a proper Sunni if you pick one of them and just abide by it. Okay, so just pick one of these and go with that. And from now on, no innovation, no ijtihad. Just shut it down. Okay, but but this whole ijtihad concept remained in Shia Islam. I think they might have copied it from the Sunnis. Okay, so in Shia Islam, on the other hand, we had so many things. First of all, the Shias were being oppressed by the Sunni majority. Okay. Second of all, Shia Islam was under heavy influence of Persian culture, right? So a lot of these things that you're talking about, like drawing and art and animals and stuff like that, they come from influence from a Persian culture, Persian art, Persian poetry, all of that. Okay, and also Sufism. So one way to, So the Persian world also was heavily influenced by mysticism, and then you had mysticism influencing Sunni world and also influencing the Shia world. And I don't know, the way that it was cracked down in the Sunni world, it survived in a different way in the Shia world, right? So it's so much so that they didn't even call it Sufism, they called it Irfan. Anyways, that's another topic for a different day. So it was influenced by all that mysticism as well, which might have loosened it up a little bit. What else did it affect it that made it loosen up? The fact that it was a rebellion. Oh, okay. Here's another thing. Okay, so the Shia world being influenced by the culture Iranian culture, and was, given that it was home to rebels against the authorities, might have had certain freedoms given to people, because this is what rebels do. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to mention, what was it? This is very important. Yeah, I forgot. Oh, yeah, never mind that. Was Ali more permissive? Generally considered haram. This is the most important thing. Last one. Okay. One of the most important things that happened in the history of Shia Islam is quite recent, and the recency of it might make people consider it not as important, right? Because we don't realize how significant of a change in the world we are witnessing until like maybe a couple hundred years after it, right? But Khomeinism was not, or like the Vilayat al-Faqih version of Shia Islam, which happened in 1979 through the Islamic Revolution, was not just a structural change in the Shia world, right? Like when it comes to a structural political change in the Shia world, where the whole concept of, hey, you need to have a representative of God on earth, even in Imams, when the 12th Imam is God, you need to have that always in some way or form. That has been taken to its extreme, so much so that they introduced the Vilayat al-Faqih as the representative of God on earth when the Mahdi is gone, right? So it's not just a structural political change; it was also a theological change. Okay, so Khomeinism, unlike what you are suggesting, which is common in Shia Islam, Khomeini himself was more in line, kind of contradictory, both with Sufism, but also with a more strict version of Islam that is more that is more associated with Sunni Islam, right? So the idea of, there's so many things that in Islam, under Shia Islam is permissible, under Sunni Islam is not permissible, but Khomeini agreed more with the Sunnis than the Shias, right? So that restrictiveness was being reintroduced to Shia Islam through Khomeinism, but at the same time Sufism, which the Orthodox Sunnis do not like, which I would say has failed. Okay, so Khomeinism was anti-nationalism, anti-art, anti a lot of these things that they do in Ashura Taswa. Like a lot of people in Iran don't know how much Khomeini was against all of that. Like they're making, a lot of things that Khomeini and Sunnis would agree on, they consider to be superstition in Shia Islam. Like a lot of Shias that are very, 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 very religious, they would think that, I don't know, the Ayatollah Khomeini they are on the side of Khomeini, but they don't know how much Khomeini would hate what they're doing, how much bid'ah and how much innovation and how much non-Islamic stuff Khomeini would consider them to be doing. Something they would assume that it will come from a Wahhabi, not from a Shia Muslim, right? Oh, one last thing that I want to mention is that Sunni Islam also became a lot more restrictive through the influence of a guy by the name of Ibn Taymiyyah. Okay, so a lot of the hardcore finding shirk everywhere, like everything, like, oh, this is shirk, that is shirk. Oh my God, you like that doll? Well, you're worshiping it. God damn it, you're a mushrik. Okay, so like the whole like trying to, okay, so you know how I said Shias were obsessed with following their moms? Okay, so through people like Ibn Taymiyyah, Sunnis became very obsessive over doing things, and also Imam Ahmad before him, way before him, but mostly like the popularization of that was done through the Ibn Taymiyyah. Sunnis, a lot of Sunnis, not all, became very obsessed in perfectly copying the way Muhammad and his companions lived. and how to do politics perfectly like how Medina was being ruled. Okay, and Ibn Taymiyyah popularized that, and also accusing people of doing shirk or associating partners with God, and calling people like evaluating whether people are Muslims or not. So much so that accusing Shias of not being Muslims. So that strict model was something that introduced with these people. And then something that you guys might be more familiar with, because this is also something more recent in history that is a big deal, were the Salafis, right? And the Wahhabi movement. So a lot of you might associate Sunnism with a lot more strictness and consider it to be a lot more restrictive, given how big of a deal Salafism and Wahhabism, how big of a deal, how much of a highlight they have been receiving, right? And again, these are people who have been influenced by Ibn Taymiyyah way of looking at Islam, right? So you had, if you want to look at it in order, you had Imam Ahmad, and then you had Ibn Taymiyyah, and the most recently aggressive version of that is Wahhabism or Salafism, right? And given how big of a highlight they get in Islam, we associate Sunni Islam with a lot more restrictive teaching. Okay, but I would assume that this is what one main reason is that this is what gets coverage in the news. I would think that you might have a different view of this if you were, for example, living in Iran, right? So even today, somebody might have a complete opposite view of you, Rob, if they were living in Iran, like as somebody who's living under tyranny of a Shia regime and looking at all the rules. They're like, just until recently, until Taliban came into power, Iran was the only country in the world where wearing the hijab is mandatory, right? And then you have a theocracy, and then you have Islam, Islamic law influencing everything from the TV to your workspace to the schools. And there's a lot of things that are banned in Iran because of Shia Islam. And then you look at Sunni countries, and then you notice like Tunisia, and you notice like Jordan, or you notice like UAE and Kuwait. And you're like, these people are living semi-Western lives with a lot of liberties that we don't enjoy. These are Sunni countries, and they're like, women are just walking the streets with their hair showing, and then like they're going, they're like watching American movies without like that much of a censorship. Like they're like living semi-liberal lives. And then you look at Saudi goddamn Arabia, and they're like, holy crap, they're like, in Saudi Arabia they're bringing concerts, and now alcohol is being like, maybe like, what is like, so to a person living in Iran, this question might be like, who cares about the fact that Shia Islam permits, I don't know, drawing pictures of animals? Like, we can't live like that's like we are extremely limited under Shia Islam, and Muslims in Sunni countries are living semi-liberal lives, so they might have a completely different view of this from their perspective. Okay, so it really depends on how you look at all of this. But yeah, that would be their view. Does that make sense? If you'd like to send me your questions for me to answer during our Q&As, become a patron. If you would like to have a discussion with me live on air at the end of the Q&As, become a YouTube member. Link to both is in the description. Thank you for your support.